Admiral Elena Vasquez stood alone on the observation deck of the massive space station, watching the last of her fleet disappear into hyperspace. At 23 years old, she had just overseen the largest military victory in human history. The alien hegemony, a coalition of 12 species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries, lay in ruins. Their homeworlds were surrendering one by one. The war was over, but Elena felt nothing. No joy, no relief, no satisfaction. Just the familiar emptiness that had followed her since childhood. She remembered the day it all began, 15 years ago when she was just 8 years old. The hegemony had attacked Earth's outer colonies without warning. Millions died in the first wave. Humanity's military was scattered, disorganized, and completely outmatched. In desperation, the Earth Defense Council had activated the emergency protocol, a last resort measure that would put the most tactically gifted minds in charge, regardless of age or experience. Elena had been playing chess with her grandfather when the military assessment team arrived at their small apartment in New Geneva. She had already won 12 consecutive games that day. Her grandfather, a retired general, had taught her strategy since she could walk. But even he was amazed by her natural ability to see patterns, predict moves, and think dozens of steps ahead. The assessment took 6 hours. Elena solved tactical problems that had stumped military academies for decades. She redesigned battle formations while eating lunch. She identified weaknesses in enemy strategies that seasoned generals had missed. By evening, they offered her a position as strategic advisor to the fleet command. Her parents refused, of course. She was just a child. But when the hegemony destroyed the Mars colonies 3 days later, killing Elena's aunt and cousins, everything changed. Elena herself demanded to help. She wanted to fight back against the monsters who had torn her family apart. At age 8, Elena became the youngest strategic advisor in military history. At 9, she was planning major fleet movements. At 10, she won her first major battle against the hegemony's 4th Fleet. At 12, they promoted her to admiral, making her the youngest flag officer ever commissioned. The other admirals resented her at first. Who was this child to tell them how to fight? But Elena's strategies worked. Her unconventional tactics confused and frustrated the enemy. She used humanity's smaller, faster ships like a swarm of angry bees, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the enemy could respond. She studied alien psychology and used their own cultural biases against them. The hegemony expected humans to fight like other species, with honor, following predictable patterns, respecting traditional combat rules. Elena threw all of that away. She ambushed supply lines, targeted communication networks, and exploited every weakness she could find. The aliens called her the Demon Child and placed the largest bounty in galactic history on her head. Elena thrived in the command center. She understood ship movements like a musician understands melody. Fleet formations made perfect sense to her in ways that human relationships never did. When she was planning battles, the world felt ordered and logical. Every decision had clear consequences. Every action served a purpose. But outside the war room, Elena struggled. The other officers treated her with respect mixed with fear. They followed her orders without question, but they never invited her to meals or casual conversations. How could they? She was their superior officer, despite being younger than their own children. Elena tried to make friends among the junior officers closer to her age, but it never worked. They saw her rank first, her age second. Even when she tried to act like a normal teenager, everyone remembered that she commanded fleets and made life or death decisions for millions of people. Her parents visited when they could, but the war consumed everything. Elena spent years in space, moving from ship to ship, always focused on the next battle. She studied alien languages, military history, and advanced tactics. She had no time for normal childhood experiences. No school friends, no birthday parties, no teenage romance. The loneliness ate at her, but she pushed it aside. People were dying. Colonies were burning. The hegemony had to be stopped, and she was the best hope humanity had. Personal happiness seemed selfish when entire worlds hung in the balance. Now, 15 years later, the war was finally over. The hegemony had surrendered unconditionally. Their fleets were destroyed or scattered. Their alliance was broken. Elena had achieved the impossible. She had saved humanity and brought peace to the galaxy. But what came next? For half her life, Elena had known only war. Her entire identity was built around military command. She was the admiral, the strategic genius, the demon child who had broken the greatest alien empire in galactic history. Who was she supposed to be in peacetime? The thought terrified her more than any battle ever had. Elena's communications officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, the Council is requesting your presence for the victory celebration on Earth. They want to present you with the highest honors and discuss your next assignment." Elena nodded without turning around. Another ceremony, another medal, another room full of people who respected her accomplishments but didn't really know her. She had received every military honor humanity could bestow. She had been featured on magazine covers, interviewed by journalists, and studied by historians. But she had never simply had a friend her own age to talk with about normal things. "Tell them I'll arrive tomorrow," Elena said. "I need some time to think." The officer left, and Elena returned to watching the stars. Somewhere out there, normal people her age were living normal lives. They went to college, fell in love, worried about careers and relationships and everyday problems. Elena envied them more than they could ever know. She had mastered the art of war, but she had never learned the simple art of being human. She could command 1,000,000 soldiers, but she couldn't make a single friend. She had saved the galaxy, but she had lost herself in the process. As the space station rotated slowly through the void, Elena began to realize that her greatest challenge lay ahead of her. Learning to live in peace would be harder than winning the war had ever been. The question was whether the girl who had become a legend could find a way to become simply human again. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Elena pressed her face to the window like an excited child. She hadn't seen her home planet in 3 years. The blue oceans and white clouds looked exactly as she remembered, but something felt different. Maybe it was her. Earth had changed during the war. The cities were larger, protected by massive defense shields that glowed faintly in the sunlight. New space elevators stretched into orbit, carrying the constant stream of supplies and people that kept humanity's expanded empire running. The planet looked prosperous and strong, no longer the vulnerable world the hegemony had tried to destroy. The shuttle landed at Geneva Spaceport, and Elena stepped onto solid ground for the first time in months. A crowd of reporters waited behind security barriers, shouting questions and taking pictures. Elena smiled and waved, playing the role of the victorious hero, but inside she felt completely disconnected from the chaos around her. "Admiral Vasquez, how does it feel to have won the war? What are your plans now that the hegemony is defeated? Will you be retiring from military service?" Elena answered their questions with practiced responses. She had given hundreds of interviews over the years, always saying the right things about duty, honor, and serving humanity. But none of it felt real anymore. She was reciting lines from a script she had memorized long ago. Her parents met her at the spaceport, and for a moment, Elena forgot about cameras and crowds. Her mother hugged her tightly, and Elena realized how much taller she had grown since their last meeting. Her father looked older, with gray hair and new lines around his eyes. "The war had aged everyone. We're so proud of you," her mother whispered. "Come on, let's go home." Home. Elena hadn't had a real home in years. She had lived on starships and space stations, in temporary quarters and military facilities. The idea of sleeping in her childhood bedroom seemed strange and wonderful. The drive through Geneva surprised her. People on the streets looked happy and relaxed in ways she hadn't seen since before the war. Children played in parks instead of hiding in bomb shelters. Street vendors sold food and flowers instead of emergency supplies. Peace was visible everywhere, and Elena had helped make it possible. But as they drove, Elena noticed something else. People recognized her even through the car's tinted windows. They pointed and stared, some taking pictures with their phones. A few even followed the car for several blocks. Elena was famous in a way that made normal life impossible. Her childhood home looked smaller than she remembered. The apartment building was the same, but Elena felt too big for it now. She had commanded vast fleets and made decisions that affected billions of lives. How was she supposed to fit back into this tiny slice of ordinary existence? Her old bedroom was exactly as she had left it 15 years ago. Posters of ancient Earth explorers covered the walls. A chess set sat on her desk, gathering dust. Children's books filled the shelves. Everything belonged to a different person. A little girl who had dreamed of adventure but never imagined the reality of war. "We kept everything the same," her father said softly. We always believed you'd come home. Elena sat on her small bed and looked around the room. This was supposed to feel comforting and familiar, but instead it felt like visiting a museum dedicated to someone else's life. She had outgrown this place before she was 10 years old. That evening, her parents invited neighbors and old family friends for a welcome home dinner. Elena tried to be social, but every conversation felt awkward. People wanted to talk about the war, asking for details about famous battles or requesting her opinions on military strategy. When she tried to change the subject, they seemed disappointed. Mrs. Chen from next door brought her daughter Lisa, who was Elena's age. "You two should be friends," she announced. "Lisa is studying art at the university." Lisa looked terrified to be in the same room as the famous Admiral Vasquez. She stammered through a few sentences about her painting classes, but Elena could see that she was intimidated rather than interested in actual friendship. How could Elena explain that she wanted to hear about normal things like college parties and boyfriend problems? That she envied Lisa's ordinary life more than Lisa could ever understand? The dinner party dragged on for hours. Elena smiled and answered questions and accepted compliments, but she felt like she was wearing a costume that didn't fit. These people saw the admiral, the war hero, the living legend. They didn't see the lonely young woman who just wanted to belong somewhere. Later that night, Elena sat alone in her room, staring at the chess set. She picked up the white queen, the most powerful piece on the board. In chess, the queen could move in any direction, could attack from multiple angles, could dominate the entire game. But the queen was also the loneliest piece, standing apart from all the others. Elena's phone buzzed with messages from military command. They wanted to discuss her future assignments, potential peacekeeping missions, and her role in the new Galactic Order. The war might be over, but Elena's responsibilities weren't. She was too valuable, too skilled, too important to simply retire and disappear. But what if she wanted to disappear? What if she wanted to be nobody special for a while? What if she wanted to learn how to be a normal person? Elena looked out her window at the Geneva skyline. Lights twinkled in apartment buildings all across the city. Behind each light was a person living an ordinary life, dealing with ordinary problems, finding ordinary happiness. They worried about jobs and relationships and paying bills. They had friends and hobbies and simple pleasures. Elena had saved all of them, but she had never been one of them. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered with a cup of tea and sat beside her on the bed. "You seem different," her mother said gently. "More distant than before." Elena considered lying, giving another practiced response about being tired or readjusting to planetary life. But this was her mother, the one person who had known her before she became Admiral Vasquez. "I don't know how to do this," Elena admitted. "I don't know how to be a regular person. I've been a military officer longer than I was ever just a kid. Everyone expects me to be this perfect hero, but I don't know who I really am underneath all that." Her mother took her hand. "You're still our Elena. You're still the little girl who loved puzzles and always asked too many questions. The war didn't erase that person. It just buried her under all the responsibility. But how do I find her again? How do I make friends when everyone sees me as some kind of legend? How do I have a normal life when the whole galaxy knows my name?" Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe you start small. Maybe you try being Elena instead of Admiral Vasquez. Maybe you give people a chance to see who you really are instead of who they expect you to be." Elena wanted to believe it was that simple, but after 15 years of command, she wasn't sure she remembered how to be anything else. The war was over, but her real battle was just beginning. Elena didn't go to book club the following Thursday. She couldn't bear the thought of facing the awkward politeness or empty chairs where her friends used to sit. Instead, she stayed home and read alone, feeling like she had lost something precious and irreplaceable. On Friday morning, Sophie appeared at Elena's apartment door. Elena's heart jumped when she saw her friend through the peephole. She opened the door hesitantly, unsure what to expect. "Can we talk?" Sophie asked. They sat in Elena's small living room, the same space where Elena had been reading adventure stories as a child. Sophie looked around, taking in the mix of military commendations and childhood books, the photographs of Elena with world leaders alongside pictures of her family. "I've been thinking about everything you told me," Sophie said, "and I realized I was being unfair." Elena waited, afraid to hope. "You lied about your background, yes, but everything else was real. The way you talked about books, your sense of humor, your opinions about characters and themes, That was genuine. The person I became friends with wasn't fake. She was just incomplete. Elena felt tears welling up. I was so scared of losing your friendship that I risked it by lying. I know that doesn't make sense. Actually, it makes perfect sense, Sophie said. I've been reading about your life since Tuesday. The articles, the interviews, the documentaries. Elena, you were 8 years old when the war started. You spent your entire adolescence and young adulthood in military command. Of course you don't know how to make friends normally. You never had the chance to learn. Elena wiped her eyes. I wanted so badly to be just a regular person that I created Anna. But Anna was always part of me. The part that got buried under all the responsibility. Sophie leaned forward. Here's what I realized. I was angry that you didn't trust me with the truth. But I never asked myself whether I would have given you a chance if I had known who you were from the beginning. Would you have? Sophie was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Probably not. I would have been too intimidated, too convinced that we had nothing in common. I would have assumed you were too important to want friendships with ordinary people. Elena nodded sadly. That's what everyone assumes. But that's my prejudice, not your fault. I judged you based on your reputation instead of who you actually are. The Elena I've gotten to know loves science fiction, makes terrible jokes, and genuinely cares about people's opinions. Fame doesn't change those qualities. Elena felt something loosening in her chest, a tension she had carried for months. So what happens now? Now we try again, but with complete honesty this time. I want to be friends with Elena Vasquez. All of her. Not just the parts that feel safe to share. Over the following weeks, Elena and Sophie rebuilt their friendship on a foundation of truth. Sophie asked questions about Elena's military service, not from celebrity curiosity but from genuine interest in understanding her friend's experiences. Elena shared stories about the loneliness of command, the weight of making decisions that affected billions of lives, and the difficulty of transitioning to civilian life. In return, Sophie helped Elena navigate normal social situations that felt foreign after years of military protocol. They went shopping together, tried new restaurants, and had the kind of casual conversations that Elena had been craving for years. Marcus took longer to come around, but eventually he called Elena and asked if they could meet for coffee. He was curious about her perspectives on leadership and strategy, but he was also interested in getting to know the person behind the legend. I keep forgetting you're famous, he said during one of their conversations. You're just Elena to me, the person who thinks Dune is overrated and makes fun of science fiction plot holes. Elena laughed. That's exactly what I want to be. The book club slowly reformed, but it was different now. Some members had left, uncomfortable with Elena's presence, but others had stayed, and new people joined who were specifically interested in meeting the person rather than the legend. Mrs. Chen became something of a protective grandmother figure, defending Elena from curious newcomers who seemed more interested in her fame than her literary opinions. She's here to discuss books, not give military interviews, Mrs. Chen would say firmly when someone asked inappropriate questions. Elena began finding balance in other areas of her life as well. She accepted select military consulting assignments, but only those that genuinely interested her, and allowed her to make positive contributions to galactic peace. She declined most media requests but agreed to a few interviews focused on veterans' issues and the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. Dr. Walsh helped Elena understand that her identity didn't have to be either Admiral Vasquez or regular Elena. She could be both, depending on the situation and her own choices. You don't have to hide your accomplishments to make friends, Dr. Walsh explained, but you also don't have to lead with them. Let people get to know Elena the person first, and then they can decide whether they're comfortable with Elena the Admiral. Elena started dating, something that felt impossibly complicated at first. But Sophie introduced her to David, a quiet historian who was more interested in Elena's thoughts about books than her military victories. Their relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than celebrity fascination. A year after joining the book club, Elena hosted a dinner party at her apartment. Sophie, Marcus, Mrs. Chen, and David sat around her small table, sharing food and conversation like family. The walls displayed both her childhood drawings and her military commendations, a visual representation of her complete identity. You know, Sophie said as they cleared dishes, I'm glad you lied to us initially. Elena looked surprised. Really? If you had introduced yourself as Admiral Vasquez, I would have spent months being intimidated before I ever saw you as a potential friend. The lie gave us a chance to connect as people first. Elena considered this. Maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes you have to hide parts of yourself temporarily to give people a chance to see the other parts. But only temporarily, Marcus added. Real friendship requires truth eventually. Elena nodded. She had learned that making friends as a famous person required a delicate balance. She needed to be strategic about when and how to reveal her background, giving people time to see her humanity before confronting them with her legend. But ultimately, lasting relationships required complete honesty. As her friends left that evening, Elena felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had spent years believing that her fame made normal relationships impossible, but the truth was more complex. Making friends required vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to risk rejection. Her celebrity status made it more challenging, but not impossible. Elena Vasquez, the child who had commanded fleets and saved the galaxy, had finally learned the most difficult skill of all, how to be simply human. She had discovered that the qualities that made her an effective military leader, strategic thinking, careful observation, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, could also help her navigate the complex world of civilian relationships. Most importantly, she had learned that she didn't have to choose between being the hero who saved humanity and the ordinary person who loved books and friendship. She could be both, as long as she was honest about all parts of herself. Elena's apartment felt warm and lived in as she cleaned up after the dinner party. For the first time since childhood, she was exactly where she wanted to be, surrounded by people who knew and cared about her complete, complicated, fully human self. Elena sat in the small waiting room, fidgeting with her hands and wondering if this was a mistake. The office looked nothing like the sterile military facilities she was used to. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, plants in the corners, and abstract paintings on the walls created an atmosphere that was supposed to be calming. Instead, Elena felt exposed and vulnerable. Dr. Jennifer Walsh opened her door and smiled warmly. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Nothing about her suggested she was intimidated by Elena's reputation. Elena, come on in. Elena hesitated. She had faced alien armadas without fear, but walking into a therapist's office felt terrifying. This was uncharted territory, and she had no tactical manual to guide her. Dr. Walsh's office was even more casual than the waiting room. Books covered every surface. A tea kettle sat on a small table and a large window looked out onto a garden. The therapist settled into a comfortable chair and gestured for Elena to sit wherever she felt comfortable. So, Dr. Walsh said simply, "What brings you here?" Elena had rehearsed this conversation, but now all her prepared words seemed inadequate. "I don't know how to make friends," she said finally. Dr. Walsh nodded as if this was the most normal statement in the world. "Tell me more about that. Everyone knows who I am. They see Admiral Vasquez instead of just Elena. I've tried joining clubs and taking classes, but people treat me like some kind of celebrity or museum exhibit. I don't know how to have normal relationships." "When did you last have a normal relationship?" Elena thought about it. "I was 8 years old. That's when you joined the military?" "That's when the war started, when I became someone important instead of just a kid." Elena looked out the window at the garden. "I've been Admiral Vasquez longer than I was ever just Elena. Sometimes I'm not sure if there's anything left of the original person." Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. "What was 8-year-old Elena like?" "Curious. I asked too many questions and wanted to understand how everything worked. I loved puzzles and games and reading about explorers. I was shy around new people but excited about learning new things." Elena smiled sadly. "I wanted to make friends, but I was always a little different. Maybe too serious for other kids, and now I'm too famous, too important, too intimidating. People don't see me as a person they could be friends with. They see someone who commands fleets and makes history." Dr. Walsh was quiet for a moment. "Elena, what do you think friendship is?" The question surprised her. "I'm not sure I know anymore. In the military, relationships were based on rank and duty. I had subordinates who followed orders and superiors who gave them. Even my personal staff kept things professional. I never had peers, really. Just people above or below me in the chain of command. But before the military, Elena thought back to her early childhood. I remember playing with my neighbor's daughter, Maria. We built blanket forts and shared secrets and made up stories about going on adventures together. She didn't care that I was good at chess or that adults said I was smart. She just wanted someone to play with. What happened to Maria? Her family moved away when I was 7, right before everything changed. Elena felt a pang of loss for that simple friendship she had barely remembered until now. Dr. Walsh poured 2 cups of tea and offered one to Elena. Here's what I think might be happening. You've spent 15 years in a role where you had to be perfect, where mistakes could cost lives, where you couldn't show weakness or uncertainty. That's created armor around you. Very effective armor for military command, but not so helpful for making friends. Elena sipped her tea. It was chamomile, soothing and warm. So how do I take off the armor? Slowly, carefully, and with people who feel safe. Dr. Walsh smiled. You can't expect to jump from commanding fleets to having normal friendships overnight. That's too big a leap. You need to practice being vulnerable in small ways with low stakes. But how? Everyone recognizes me. Everyone knows what I've done. Not everyone. And not everyone cares about military fame. Some people are more interested in who you are now than what you accomplished in the past. Elena was skeptical. Where would I find people like that? Let's start smaller. Before you worry about making friends, you need to figure out who you are when you're not being Admiral Vasquez. What do you like? What interests you? What makes you happy? Elena realized she didn't know how to answer. I liked commanding fleets. I was good at strategy and tactics. I enjoyed solving complex problems and outsmarting enemies. Those are things you were good at. I'm asking what you enjoyed. What brought you joy, not just success? Elena struggled with the question. She had been focused on duty and efficiency for so long that she had forgotten about personal preferences. I used to love reading, she said slowly. Not military history or tactical manuals, but adventure stories and science fiction. I liked imagining other worlds and other possibilities. When did you stop reading for pleasure? I'm not sure. Somewhere during the war, I guess. There wasn't time for anything that wasn't essential. Dr. Walsh nodded. So maybe we start there. Maybe you begin by rediscovering the parts of yourself that got buried under all the responsibility. Elena spent the rest of the session talking about her childhood interests and the person she had been before the war. Dr. Walsh listened without judgment, asking gentle questions that helped Elena remember forgotten pieces of herself. As Elena prepared to leave, Dr. Walsh gave her an assignment. This week, I want you to do something just for fun, something that has nothing to do with military service or public duties, something that 8-year-old Elena would have enjoyed. Elena walked back to her apartment thinking about the conversation. For the first time since returning to Earth, she felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe learning to be human again was possible. Maybe the girl who had loved adventure stories was still somewhere inside the woman who had commanded fleets. That evening, Elena did something she hadn't done in years. She went to a bookstore and browsed the fiction section, looking for stories that had nothing to do with war or strategy. She bought 3 novels about exploration and discovery, stories that reminded her of the dreams she had held as a child. Sitting in her small bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of her 8-year-old self, Elena opened the first book and began to read. For the first time in 15 years, she lost herself in someone else's adventure, instead of planning her own battles. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something important. Elena was starting to remember who she had been before she became someone else's idea of a hero. And maybe, eventually, she could learn to be both. The person who had saved the galaxy and the person who just wanted to make a friend. Elena discovered the small neighborhood library by accident. She was walking aimlessly through Geneva's quiet residential district, trying to clear her head after another frustrating therapy session, when she noticed the modest building tucked between a bakery and a flower shop. A handwritten sign in the window advertised a weekly book club meeting. The library felt different from the university or any of the formal institutions she had tried. It was cozy and unpretentious, with mismatched furniture and the comfortable chaos of a place where people actually spent time reading. An elderly librarian looked up from her desk and smiled without a hint of recognition. "Can I help you find something, dear?" Elena almost gave her real name, then caught herself. "I'm Anna. I was wondering about your book club." "Oh, wonderful. We meet every Thursday evening. Small group, Very casual. This week we're discussing The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. Have you read it? Elena shook her head. She had read military histories and tactical analyses, but science fiction had been relegated to childhood memories. No problem at all, you can jump in any time. We're more interested in good conversation than formal literary analysis. Elena felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. What kinds of people come to the meetings? All sorts. We have a retired teacher, a young mother, a graduate student, a mechanic who loves space stories. Ages range from 20-something to 70-something. Everyone just loves to read and talk about books. This sounded exactly like what Elena was looking for. Normal people with a shared interest, gathering in a low-pressure environment. Nobody would expect Admiral Vasquez to show up at a neighborhood book club. Elena checked out a copy of the book and spent the next 3 days reading it obsessively. The story fascinated her. A tale of an alien world where inhabitants could change gender, exploring themes of identity, politics, and what it meant to be human. For the first time in years, Elena read something that challenged her thinking rather than reinforcing her existing knowledge. Thursday evening arrived, and Elena stood outside the library for 10 minutes, working up courage to go inside. She had led military campaigns involving millions of soldiers, but joining a book club felt impossibly daunting. The meeting room was small and warm, with 8 people sitting in a circle of folding chairs. They looked exactly as the librarian had described, a diverse group united only by their love of reading. Elena introduced herself as Anna and found an empty chair. "So, Anna, what did you think of the book?" asked Mrs. Chen, the retired teacher. Elena had prepared for this question, but she was still nervous. "I found it thought-provoking. The way Le Guin explored identity and the impact of biology on society was fascinating. It made me think about how much of who we are is determined by our circumstances versus our choices." A young woman named Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and the political intrigue reminded me of real-world conflicts, but seen from a completely different perspective." Elena felt a thrill of connection. These people were engaging with the same ideas that had captivated her, treating her thoughts as valuable contributions rather than pronouncements from an authority figure. The discussion continued for 2 hours, ranging from philosophical questions about gender and identity to technical aspects of Le Guin's world-building. Elena found herself relaxing, forgetting to monitor her words for anything that might reveal her true identity. She was simply another reader sharing opinions about a book. Tom, the mechanic, disagreed with Elena's interpretation of the ending. "I think you're reading too much political strategy into it," he said good-naturedly. "Sometimes a story is just about personal relationships." Elena almost laughed. After years of having her every opinion treated as gospel, someone was casually disagreeing with her about something that had nothing to do with military tactics. It felt wonderful. "You might be right," Elena said. "I tend to see political implications in everything. Occupational hazard." "What kind of work do you do?" asked Sophie. Elena's heart skipped. She had prepared for this question but still felt unpracticed at deception. Government consulting. Very boring administrative stuff. It wasn't entirely a lie, and it seemed to satisfy everyone's curiosity without generating follow-up questions. After the meeting, the group lingered in the library, continuing their conversation in smaller clusters. Elena found herself talking with Sophie, who turned out to be a graduate student in sociology, and Marcus, a young father who worked as a software engineer. "We usually grab coffee after meetings," Sophie said. "Want to join us?" Elena's first instinct was to make an excuse and leave. This was already more social interaction than she had managed in months, but something about the casual invitation, the assumption that she was just another person they might enjoy spending time with, made her say yes. The cafe down the street was busy with evening customers, providing enough background noise for private conversation. Elena ordered tea and listened as her new acquaintances talked about their lives. Sophie was writing her thesis on social movements. Marcus was dealing with his toddler's sleep regression. Normal problems, everyday concerns, the kind of conversation Elena had been craving. "What about you, Anna?" Marcus asked. Any family? Kids? Elena felt a familiar pang. No family of my own. I've been traveling a lot for work, so it's been hard to maintain relationships. This was the closest she had come to talking honestly about her life, even if she couldn't share the full truth. That sounds lonely, Sophie said with genuine sympathy. Is that why you're in Geneva now? New assignment. Something like that. I'm trying to figure out what comes next. Elena realized she was having exactly the kind of conversation she had longed for. People treating her as a friend, showing interest in her life, offering support and understanding. It felt both natural and miraculous. They talked until the cafe started closing, and Elena found herself reluctant to leave. She had enjoyed the evening more than any social interaction since returning to Earth. Same time next week? Sophie asked as they gathered their things. Definitely, Elena said and meant it. Walking home through Geneva's quiet streets, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the anticipation of seeing friends again. These people didn't know about her military service or her famous victories. They knew Anna, who had opinions about books and drank tea and was trying to figure out her life. Elena called Dr. Walsh the next morning. I think I made friends, she said without preamble. Tell me about it. Elena described the book club, the conversation, the coffee afterward. As she talked, she realized how significant the evening had been. For a few hours, she had simply been a person among other people, valued for her thoughts and company rather than her accomplishments. How does it feel? Dr. Walsh asked. Terrifying and wonderful. I keep waiting for them to find out who I really am and start treating me differently. Anna is who you really are too, Dr. Walsh pointed out. She's just a part of Elena that hasn't had much chance to exist lately. Elena sat with that thought. Maybe her true identity wasn't just Admiral Vasquez, legendary war hero. Maybe it was also Anna, book lover and coffee drinker, an ordinary person seeking connection. The challenge would be learning to balance both parts of herself, and eventually, finding people who could accept Elena Vasquez, the complete person, rather than just the public legend. But for now, Elena was content to be Anna for a few hours each week, rediscovering the simple pleasure of friendship one book at a time. Elena had been attending the book club for 3 months, and they had become the best part of her week. As Anna, she had developed genuine friendships with Sophie, Marcus, and several other regular members. They shared inside jokes, remembered details about each other's lives, and even socialized outside the weekly meetings. Elena was happier than she had been in years, but the deception was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. When Sophie invited her to a birthday party, Elena had to decline because she was receiving a commendation from the Galactic Council that same evening. When Marcus asked about her weekend plans, she couldn't mention that she was consulting with military leaders about peacekeeping missions. The lies were small but constant. Elena found herself creating an elaborate fictional life for Anna. A boring government job, a non-existent apartment across town, imaginary family members. Each fabrication felt like a betrayal of the friendship she was trying to build. Dr. Walsh had been encouraging Elena to gradually reveal more of her true self, but Elena was terrified of losing the only real friendship she had managed to form. What would happen when her book club friends discovered they had been sharing coffee with one of the most famous people in the galaxy? The crisis came unexpectedly during their discussion of Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card's classic about a child military genius who saves humanity from alien invasion. Elena had chosen the book herself, drawn to its themes despite the uncomfortable parallels to her own life. The tragedy of Ender, Sophie was saying, is that he was robbed of his childhood. He was forced to become something beyond human at an age when he should have been playing games and making friends. Elena felt her throat tighten. The description hit too close to home. Marcus nodded. It's like that story in the news a few years back. That young admiral who won the war against the hegemony. Elena Vasquez, I think. She was just a kid when it all started. I always wondered what happened to her psychologically. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. The conversation was venturing into dangerous territory. I heard she's been trying to live a normal life since the war ended, said Mrs. Chen. Poor thing probably has no idea how to relate to regular people after all those years in command. I read an interview where she Talked about feeling isolated, Sophie added. Can you imagine being that famous and accomplished but having no real friends? All that power and success but no genuine human connections. Elena wanted to disappear. They were discussing her life with sympathy and insight, but they had no idea she was sitting right there. The irony was almost unbearable. Maybe she needs to learn to be honest about who she is, said Tom the mechanic. Can't build real relationships on lies and pretenses. The comment hit Elena like a physical blow. Tom was absolutely right, and his words applied directly to her current situation. She was building friendships with these people based on deception. How real could those relationships be if they didn't know who she actually was? Elena excused herself and went to the bathroom where she stared at her reflection in the mirror. She could continue the charade, keep coming to book club as Anna, maintain these friendships built on half-truths, or she could take the terrifying step of revealing her identity and risk losing everything she had built. When she returned to the group, they had moved on to discussing other aspects of the novel. But Elena couldn't focus on the conversation. Tom's words kept echoing in her mind. Can't build real relationships on lies and pretenses. After the meeting, Sophie invited Elena for their usual coffee. They walked to the cafe in comfortable silence, a routine that had become precious to Elena. She dreaded the possibility that this might be their last normal conversation. You seem distracted tonight, Sophie observed as they settled into their favorite corner table. Elena took a deep breath. Sophie, can I tell you something? Something important? Of course. What's wrong? Elena's heart was pounding. This was harder than facing enemy fleets. My name isn't Anna. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am. Sophie's expression grew concerned. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are you hiding from someone dangerous? Not exactly. Elena struggled to find the right words. My real name is Elena Vasquez. Sophie blinked, processing the information. Elena watched as recognition dawned on her friend's face. Sophie's eyes widened and she leaned back in her chair. You're Admiral Elena Vasquez? The Elena Vasquez. Elena nodded miserably. I'm sorry I lied to you. I just wanted to have normal friendships, and I thought if people knew who I really was, they'd treat me differently. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, staring at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. You've been coming to our book club pretending to be someone else? I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was just being a different part of myself. The part that exists when I'm not being Admiral Vasquez. But you lied about everything. Your job, your life, your background. Elena felt tears threatening. I know, I'm sorry. I just didn't know how else to make friends. Everyone who knows who I am treats me like some kind of celebrity or legend. You're the first people in years who have talked to me like I'm just a regular person. Sophie was processing this information, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and what might have been hurt. So our entire friendship has been based on deception? No, Elena said desperately. Everything I've shared about books, all our conversations, my opinions and thoughts, those were real. The only lies were about my background. The person you've gotten to know is real. Sophie shook her head slowly. I need some time to think about this. This is a lot to process. Elena watched her friend gather her things and leave the cafe. She sat alone at their usual table, feeling the weight of her decision. She had chosen honesty, but it might have cost her the friendship she valued most. Over the next few days, word spread through the book club. Elena received polite but distant messages from Marcus and Tom. Mrs. Chen called to express her understanding, but suggested Elena might be more comfortable in a different group. The casual, natural relationships she had built were suddenly formal and awkward. Elena felt the familiar isolation creeping back. She had tried to be honest, as Dr. Walsh had encouraged, but the result was exactly what she had feared. Her identity as Admiral Vasquez had poisoned the simple friendship she had worked so hard to build. The question now was whether any of her book club friends could see past her fame to the person she really was, or whether she was destined to remain forever alone behind the armor of her own legend. Elena had learned that honesty was necessary for real friendship, but she was beginning to understand that it might not be sufficient. The gap between Admiral Elena Vasquez and Anna, who loved books, might be too wide for some people to bridge. Still, as she sat in her apartment reading the book they had been discussing, Elena knew she had made the right choice. She would rather be honestly alone than dishonestly connected. The question was whether anyone else would be brave enough to try knowing all of her. Elena decided to start with something simple. She would enroll in Geneva University and try to experience normal student life. After weeks of arguing with military command, she finally convinced them to grant her extended leave. She would audit classes, live in a dormitory, and attempt to blend in with people her own age. The university registrar looked confused when Elena walked into the admissions office. "Admiral Vasquez, are you here to give a lecture?" "Actually, I'd like to take some classes. Literature, maybe history, something completely different from military studies." The woman's eyes widened. "You want to be a student?" "Here?" Elena nodded. "I never had a chance to go to college. I thought it might be interesting." Within hours, news of Elena's enrollment spread across campus. Students gathered in groups, whispering and pointing whenever she walked by. Professors stumbled over their words when she entered classrooms. The university president personally escorted her to every class, treating her like a visiting dignitary rather than a regular student. Her first literature class was a disaster. The professor, Dr. Martinez, spent the entire session asking Elena about military strategy instead of discussing the assigned novel. Other students sat in awed silence, too intimidated to participate in discussions when a famous admiral was in the room. "Admiral Vasquez," Dr. Martinez said, "I'm sure you have fascinating insights about the warrior culture in this epic poem." Elena wanted to talk about the characters' emotions, the beautiful language, the way the story made her feel. Instead, she found herself analyzing battle tactics and discussing the realism of ancient combat techniques. This wasn't what she had wanted at all. After class, Elena tried to approach a group of students her age. They were discussing weekend plans and complaining about upcoming exams. Normal college things. Exactly what Elena wanted to be part of. "Hi," she said awkwardly. "I'm Elena." The students froze. One of them, a young man with messy brown hair, stammered, "We know who you are, Admiral. Everyone knows who you are. I was hoping we could just talk about regular stuff. You know, classes and professors and campus life." A girl with bright pink hair looked terrified. "You want to talk to us about campus life? Aren't you busy running the galaxy or something?" Elena's heart sank. "I'm just trying to be a student like everyone else." "But you're not like everyone else," the brown-haired boy said. "You're Elena Vasquez. You've killed aliens and saved humanity. We're just normal people who stress about history papers." Elena wanted to tell them that she also stressed about papers, that she was more nervous about fitting in than she had ever been about commanding fleets, but she could see it was hopeless. To them, she wasn't a lonely young woman seeking friendship. She was a celebrity, a legend, someone from a completely different world. Elena tried joining campus clubs, but the same pattern repeated everywhere. The chess club treated her like a grandmaster giving a simultaneous exhibition. The debate team asked her to judge rather than participate. The hiking club wanted her to lead expeditions and share survival stories from her military campaigns. Even when Elena explicitly asked to be treated like a regular member, people couldn't forget who she was. They spoke carefully around her as if afraid of saying something wrong to someone so important. They asked for autographs and selfies instead of genuine conversation. Her dormitory assignment was another failure. Elena had requested a standard double room with a random roommate, hoping for a normal college experience. But the university put her in a single suite, citing security concerns and privacy issues. The other students on her floor treated her dorm room like a tourist attraction, walking by slowly and taking pictures of her door. Elena's roommate situation became a campus legend. Sarah, a shy engineering student, had originally been assigned to share the suite. But Sarah was so nervous about living with a famous admiral that she requested a transfer after just 2 days. "I'm sorry," Sarah said when Elena found her packing. "It's not personal. I just can't relax with someone so important living in the same room. I keep worrying that I'll say something stupid or that reporters will want to interview me about what you're like as a roommate." Elena watched Sarah leave and realized how impossible her situation was. People couldn't see past her reputation to the person underneath. Her fame had become a barrier that prevented real human connection. She tried a different approach. Elena signed up for evening cooking classes at a community center outside the university. She used a fake name and wore ordinary clothes, hoping to blend in with other amateur chefs. For one beautiful evening, it worked. Elena found herself laughing with a middle-aged businessman who burned his souffle and joking with an elderly woman who told stories about her grandchildren. Nobody recognized her. Nobody treated her like a celebrity. For 3 hours, she was just another person learning to make pasta from scratch. But her cover didn't last. A local reporter was taking a cooking class for a lifestyle article and recognized Elena despite her disguise. The next day, photos of Admiral Vasquez's secret cooking hobby appeared in news feeds across the galaxy. The cooking instructor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was mortified. "I had no idea who you were. I treated you like everyone else. I even corrected your knife technique." "That's exactly what I wanted," Elena said sadly. "You treated me like a normal person. But you're not a normal person. You're Admiral Elena Vasquez. I should have shown more respect." Elena left the cooking class and walked through Geneva's old town, feeling more isolated than ever. She passed cafes full of young people talking and laughing together. She saw couples holding hands and friends sharing inside jokes. All around her, normal human connections were happening naturally, easily. But Elena couldn't access any of it. Her phone buzzed with a message from her commanding officer. "Admiral, we have a situation developing in the Rigel sector. Your expertise is needed immediately." Elena stared at the message for a long time. Part of her was relieved. In space, commanding fleets, she knew exactly who she was and what she was supposed to do. The military world made sense in ways that civilian life didn't, but another part of her rebelled against the idea of giving up so easily. She had spent her entire adult life serving others, sacrificing her personal happiness for the greater good. Didn't she deserve a chance to discover who she could be beyond her military role? Elena typed back a response. "I need more time. Give the assignment to Admiral Chen." It was the first time in her career that she had turned down a mission. As she hit send, Elena felt both terrified and oddly free. She didn't know if learning to be normal was possible, but she wasn't ready to stop trying. The question was, how could someone who had become larger than life ever learn to be human-sized again?